You are listening to The Evolved Masculine. Whether you are wanting more and better sex, more confidence, healthier relationships, or a greater understanding of and deeper connection to your masculinity, this is the podcast for you. I am your host, Destin, Gerek. Welcome, everyone. This is Destin, Gerek, and you're watching the Evolved Masculine podcast. I don't know about you, but my social media feeds, especially Facebook, have been flooded with Plandemic, this 26-minute short video on, I don't know, some would refer to it as a conspiracy theory video or a series of theories. Other people speak of it as the truth, but whatever it is, it certainly brings up a lot of emotions. It's been all over the traditional media as well, with everyone trying to debunk it. And I just see more and more anger and vitriol while people dig in their heels with their determination of what they believe to be true. Today's episode, I'm calling COVID, Plandemic, the media, fear, manipulation, awakening, and a better world. Kind of lengthy title, but you'll see. I think we're going to move through that whole progression. My guest today is Daniel Pinchbeck, who I've known for, I don't know, probably somewhere in the vicinity of 10 years. And he probably doesn't even know this bit, but in 2004, October, November 2004, when I was traveling through southern Mexico hitchhiking and ultimately had what I consider my spiritual awakening. Literally the first week of my spiritual awakening, I met somebody who told me about his book, his first book at the time, Breaking Open the Head. And that is the first time Daniel Pinchbeck came into my awareness. This person had read his book, was blown away by it. Her whole head was broken open through it. And there was it definitely left a mark on me, put him on my radar. And then somewhere probably a few years later, we had the pleasure of meeting through the kind of West Coast Burning Man Festival community. And then our paths just kind of kept intersecting over the years. This is the second time I'm having him on my podcast, as I had him on after the 2016 election, but before inauguration, as we talked about Trump and the big concern of what was to happen. And I think that what has happened over these past few years both met and maybe even exceeded some of those expectations/concerns. So it's a pleasure to be diving into this with him today. He put forward a very clear and strong critique of the Plandemic film that certainly caught my attention, as well as 1,000+ comments of other folks as well, including the filmmaker himself. We'll dive into that and so much more. Welcome, Daniel Pinchbeck.
Thank you, Destin. It's great to be here. And yeah, as I told you before, I really enjoyed your last book or your new book, and kind of like the direction that you've been going with your various efforts. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I really appreciate your kind of testimonial blurb for my book was deeply appreciated, and I added it to my Amazon page, all that jazz. So yeah. First, what would you like to tell my audience about you that hasn't been said?
Well, I don't really know. I've started a new web magazine, Liminal.news. I've been kind of working with a friend right now to come up with kind of a concept for a sort of webinar over the summer on kind of like, what sort of maybe called building the regenerative future, kind of thinking about how we get people from their current state of being kind of like stunned, like deers in the headlights, to actually thinking about what people can start doing as we're seeing so many incredible changes.
And that's what really draws me to you, Daniel. Like over the years, you are one of the kind of deep thinkers about what's going on and where things are going that I can't stop paying attention to, quite frankly. That you have, some would think of you as having a certain kind of like pessimistic type of view, but I don't actually think so at all. I think you have a all in all rather realistic view with a pragmatic, actually tinged with a very strong sense of optimism. Because on one hand, you see all very clearly and are able to weave together and integrate and explain what is happening on a larger structural level across so many different areas of life. All the negative impacts of where it's left unchecked is driving humanity in this planet. And you hold on to a very strong, optimistic idea of what is possible, and continuously put out messages of like, all right, this is what I see, and this is what I believe it would require for humanity to save itself and actually create something better out of this. And I find that very admirable, to be honest.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, it hasn't been an easy task. I mean, I wrote a book that came out in 2017 that I was very excited about. And I got Russell Brand and Sting to kind of write introductions for it, called How Soon Is Now, which was on the one hand kind of reckoning with the global ecological emergency and how severe it is, and then kind of offered, what would be the system design approach that humanity collectively would have to take to avert catastrophe and potentially our own extinction. And I thought the book would be a big book, but actually it was very, very hard to get people to pay attention to it. I think it was too big for people, like too abstract. Most people are just, they've got personal debt. They're trying to get their kids through school. They don't have the bandwidth to think about kind of the systemic design situation. And then even more complex. I mean, my work has also talked about kind of esotericism, shamanism, kind of the occult. So there's other layers. As you said, I talk about a lot of different layers that other people maybe talk about one of the layers, but maybe I encompass a lot of different layers. And I've been thinking recently about you mentioned Plandemic and this kind of frustration, almost like hysteria people are feeling around conspiracy, which is a term that has to be unpacked and has a lot of different levels to it.
That is one of the major reasons why I wanted to bring you on, is quite honestly, especially basically since this whole pandemic really took hold, my social media feeds have just been overridden with people's theories and ideas as to what's going on, and a lot of agitation, alternative theories, conspiracy theories, etc. And to be honest, I didn't want to touch it. I didn't. I was doing my best to ignore it. I was doing some unfriending and blocking or hiding for 30 days of people, just like, God, like, I'm doing something. I'm doing something in the world. This just feels like a distraction, a big time and energy suck. But I just kept increasingly feeling, all right, I'm also a voice that has an audience. And I've got folks who, in my world, who I really care about, who I see don't know what to do with all of this. And I need to throw my voice into the ring in some way. So it's given me time to sit and digest with how I want to address it. I was just going to do a rant, and then I decided to, after reading your critique of Plandemic and your interactions, decide, what, let me bring you on, and we'll hash this out between the two of you. I guess we can start from the place of What do you think about all of these alternative, quote unquote, conspiracy theories that are flying around right now about quarantining and the state of this pandemic and what's really going on?
So yeah, I mean, and also, I will start out by admitting that I don't know. I mean, I'm trying to understand and reason my way through it, and that's been a really big, cumbersome effort. That sometimes I get into like wormholes and rabbit holes, and then have to like try to pull myself out from them. I definitely think there's more going on than the official story is telling us. Just as, I don't think Jeffrey Epstein committed suicide in his high security cell. I think that, there are times when things happen that the mainstream media actually is a very tame instrument and doesn't actually, whether it was the New Yorker or the New York Times or, even the Nation, none of the traditional media organs even touched that as a possible cover-up, which is very strange.
So why do you think that is?
Because I think there's intelligence operatives who are embedded in all the traditional media outlets. And I think it's been that way for a long time. I think the CIA partially directs the stories.
So
on some issues. And in other issues, those are very well-researched papers, and if you write for them, the fact-checking is extraordinary. But I do think
that's one of the big things
distrust.
What's that? That's one of the big things that is going on right now. People are there is a massive distrust in both the government and the quote mainstream media that has arisen, and arguably, the Trump and this like alt-right, whatever right-wing political machine has helped drive it much higher. It has also deeply embedded itself in the quote-unquote conscious communities, wellness communities, etc. There's this term conspirituality of where these conspiratorial and spiritual communities kind of merge. And I think that's where I do have some I have concern about misdirection. I have concern that yes, shit is fucked up. The quote unquote mainstream media and the government are not to be trusted at face value. There is a lot going on that we're not being told the truth about. I 100% believe that. And yeah, okay. I sat through the 2-hour and change David Icke interview on London Real. I don't think that's real. That's really the truth, though, either. And this is, and likewise with Plandemic. My concern is that we're so entrained to this dualistic thinking that if that's not true and this is presented saying that's not true, then that must mean that this is the truth. When I just believe that we need to be bringing a much stronger and deeper critical thinking and analysis to all of it. Like what?
Yeah, that's what I've been trying to do, and it's extremely difficult. And the problem is, it's like it's like a sorting through a mystery or trying to do a complex operation. And you sort of have to you give things different valences, like so for instance, like I think it's highly likely that this was an engineered virus.
So Rye brings up a good argument, so to speak. He says,
"What's that?"
In regards to your CIA reference in the intelligence operatives in the press. He's like, well, are you saying that the CIA directs the entire world's press, like the BBC, China, RT, Al Jazeera, Canada?
But there's as Noam Chomsky and other analysts have said. I mean, there's manufactured consent. I mean, there are ways that they're able to inflect the discourse, and you can go back and study this. It's not even.
Yeah, but
arguable.
Most people aren't. Is there a way that you can simplify it for folks who don't even know who Noam Chomsky is?
Just that the traditional mainstream media is definitely infiltrated by intelligence operatives, and therefore when it comes to many very, very critical issues, they can't entirely be trusted. Although they can be more or less trusted in some other ways, because they will get the facts, they do the research, and so on. So there's vested interests.
You're speaking of the government operative infiltration, but then there's also the fact that in the United States we have something like 5 different companies, AK with 5 individuals really sitting at the top of them, that are that own almost all of the major media outlets in the United States.
Yeah, monopoly control of the media is a huge problem, and also part of the reason we're in such a horrible situation right now is because there was laws where if you had a major news organization, it had to present some type of balanced coverage. But actually, Clinton removed some of those protections, which allowed Fox News to then become the unbalanced monstrosity that it is now, sort of mind control mechanism for the masses.
So I get that, and quite honestly, I as a whole, I believe that. I think that there are nuances, complexities there. Yeah, there's. I consume mainstream press as much as various other presses. I do my best to
I read it all the time, and a lot of it is the best and smartest stuff out there.
So how do you?
And I worked in the medium, and I wrote for the New York Times Magazine and Esquire and Rolling Stone, and I was written about, in some of those places. So I have a, very strong understanding of the kind of techniques they use to create consensus, the way they manipulate language, it's a complex operation, that's only one piece of the puzzle, not even the main thing that I wanted to
Go for it.
Get into. So I mean, the evidence is, I think, is quite circumstantially strong that this was some type of engineered virus. Wuhan had this level 4 virology lab, which was the only one in China. The lead researcher there was a woman, I think Shi is her last name, S-H-I-H. She had been working for years on coronaviruses, and actually doing something called gain-of-function research, where she was making them more communicable to human beings.
And why would she be doing that?
What's that?
Why?
Well, there's multiple reasons. Some of the research was funded by organizations like the WHO in an effort to get ahead of how viruses might mutate by understanding what could happen. But for instance, there's a paper from 2007 where she and a group of researchers were splicing HIV elements into a coronavirus from a bat to make it more potentially communicable to humans.
So isn't this something that was raised in Plandemic?
Yeah, my problem with Plandemic, as I said in my critique, is not necessarily, I'm open to conspiracy, and I'm, quote unquote, whatever you want to call it. I'm open to alternative narratives about what's going on. My problem is the way that particular piece was made was highly propagandistic and unbalanced, that I actually didn't feel it helped the situation. It didn't help us move towards critical reasoning and critical thought. It just created more fear and more hysteria.
Well, it spread like wildfire. Do you think that a more reasoned, balanced film would have reached people?
If it was well made, I think definitely. I think people are very fascinated by what's going on. And then also, the woman herself is has been largely discredited, and also a lot of the things that she said in the film were not particularly accurate. So yeah, I personally don't think that Fauci is like an enemy of the people. I think that he's an establishment doctor who, from a very mainstream perspective, is doing the best that he can. And this is actually one of the best essays on this whole situation is written by a friend of mine called Rory Spowers, and it's on Echo Hustler, and it's called "Is the Virus Our Vaccine?" And he looks at it from a systems design perspective, and kind of makes the case that, in this hyper-capitalist, nationalistic system we have now, force tends to move in a certain direction. And in a way, anything that happens, that's a major event like this, tends to advance the logic of the system towards more and more control, even towards biopolitical control and so on. So that I think is one vector and one interesting perspective. Mm. Now, having said that the virus was probably engineered in a lab, I think there's a lot of good circumstantial evidence to support, even though there are some articles that. What's that?
Yeah, there are plenty of sources that can be found that dispute that theory.
But the theory, the reasons they dispute them are not really very, very good. I mean, I think one problem is that you have people who work in biotech, mm-hmm. and in academic science, who are very much trying to protect their careers. And if it was understood that this was an engineered bioplague, there could be a lot of popular anger against people working in biotech and related fields. So there's a sort of institutional desire to protect, the funding sources and the reputation of that community. That's operating there as it so often is, rather than just like a pure desire for accuracy.
Yeah, that's a pretty serious claim.
Yeah.
And I guess where I'm a bit challenged with it is the notion of, is there anyone, like, it's a wide field. You're talking about many thousands, tens, hundreds, I don't know, of thousands of people who would fall into that field. And are you saying that every one of them, or near every one of them, has fallen in line behind this perspective out of like self-interest?
I don't know if it's tens of thousands, but I mean, I do think that the one article that came out that everyone cites from Nature magazine made an argument as to why this particular coronavirus was probably not bioengineered. But mm-hmm. that argument, other people have examined and said is quite specious. And essentially, it's one perspective, and they're using it to dismiss any claim that this could have been an engineered virus. But in fact, the lead researcher in Wuhan was this virologist, the only laboratory like this in China, who had been working with coronaviruses, with bats, doing what's called gain-of-function research for a very long time, where she was actually making them more communicable to people. Yeah. So it seems highly likely, since this virus began in Wuhan, that it walked out of that lab where she was working.
I will agree. That seems like quite a coincidence.
Yeah.
There are two questions or two statements that came in that raise two major things I do want to discuss with you. One, Brent Weiss says, curious about Daniel's thoughts on our rights. How quarantining, etc., and the disaster capitalism, the use of the government. Okay, so something has happened. There is a pandemic that has hit. I'm for one not arguing that point, though some people are arguing that as well. And then there's this notion of like, okay, but anytime anything happens, people do what they do with what happens. So those who have power and control and who believe in that power and control are going to utilize it to institute greater power and control. That's my general belief. And so that's anyway, I want to dive into that with you. And the other piece I think would be interesting, Stephanie Quain put in, from a whole system approach, it seems the virus is helping the environment to become cleaner. Example, air cleaning up, ozone layer healing, slowing use of oil, etc., which I think is
so I can address both of those, but I should do it now before I forget what they are.
Go for it.
Second one, yes, it is. And having written this book, How Soon Is Now, around the ecological emergency, we know. The IPCC, International Panel of Climate Change of the UN, scientists, 2018 issued a very, very serious warning that we only have 10 years left to radically reduce our use of CO2, or we're bound for civilizational collapse. Last winter in Europe, Europe was 1.4 degrees Celsius warmer than ever before, which is like a massive jump. 1.4 degrees is not 0.2 degrees. It really suggests that a lot of positive feedback loops are now working together to heat the climate very quickly. And it is good that the virus has, on the one hand, opened a space, a pause for reflection, and has had, a positive effect on air quality and has limited our use of CO2. Unfortunately, this is not happening as needs to happen through a kind of, systemic design, analysis, and redirection of human society away from overconsumption and away from, the way that we're, in conflict with the biosphere. This is just a haphazard thing that's happened.
Yeah, but at the same time, well, things don't often unfold the way that we think they're supposed to unfold.
Yeah.
Doesn't necessarily mean that it doesn't happen. So I just finished, as in today's my first day off of it, a 30-day cleanse, right? And it's done. I can go back to eating or doing anything however I want. But 30 days was a long time. Like I broke habits. I find myself not wanting to, for one, drink coffee. I find myself wanting to keep my sugar intake extremely minimal. There are all these things that's just like, well, I've had this taste and this experience in my body of things being different. Maybe I should be more aware of now things have opened up, of how I'm opening back up, what I'm doing instead. And I guess I believe that we'll be seeing that. I doubt it's going to be my idea of perfection or your idea of perfection. But I guess I do tend to believe that there are going to be lasting behavioral changes, some of which will be very positive.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with you with that. But also, having done all the research for How Soon Is Now, which was like multi-year project,
sure.
I also would say that there's no doubt that we need a more systemic, planetary kind of orchestration around the ecological crisis, because we actually are bringing ourselves to the brink of extinction right now.
But do you think the way that we have come together?
We do know the kind of things that we would have to do. For instance, shift from industrial farming back to regenerative forms of agriculture that replenish topsoil. But that would require a lot of people being retrained as small scale farmers and being kind of resettling the rural world and focusing on growing food in organic permaculture methods. However, that also would be a great thing to be doing right now, because food security is soon going to become a huge issue. I mean, now they're talking about, the UN says that because of coronavirus this summer, which is like in a month, we're facing famines of biblical proportions that threaten 250 million people with starvation.
See, that is my concern, quite honestly. I doubt that we've seen the worst of it.
Oh no, this is we've definitely not seen the worst of it. Things are going to get really rough, and in the U.S., things are going to get very, very strange.
And so this is my concern with a lot of these theories, etc., that are coming up. Like, by the way, I'm watching these comments, which have been rolling in, by the way, faster than I can respond to them. So we'll also address them after we're done in the comments. But 5G has been raised, and I'd like to touch that as well. There are all these ideas and theories that are floating around, and my concern is, well, what I love is that more and more people are quote unquote waking up, aka like recognizing, oh wait, maybe there's something more going on than what we're being told. That's, in this context, I'm going to use that as the basis of waking up. There are various other definitions I could use, but my concern is that then that questioning is being misdirected. That where that focus and that energy could be utilized towards creating regenerative solutions and some form of more a focused, organized resistance. Instead, it's driving a lot of time and energy is being lost down rabbit holes that I don't honestly believe are going to go anywhere.
Yeah, well, it is hard. I mean, we do as human beings, we have a kind of deep need for coherent sense making. Mm-hmm. And, at the moment you have a lot of people who are scrabbling to put together their own narratives. And it's tough. It's tough out there. It feels like hysteria. It feels like a collapse of a centralizing narrative. A very interesting book to read is Ken Wilber's book, Trump in a Post-Truth World, where he kind of argued that the victory of Trump and the triumph of fake news was a direct result of this kind of larger cycle of the evolution of consciousness, which he sees as passing through these different kind of bands through the spiral dynamics model. And since the 60s, the sort of kind of emergent kind of consciousness was what he calls the green consciousness, which is progressive, cares about the environment, cares about diversity and multiculturalism and so on. But the shadow side of that form of consciousness is a sort of de-hierarchization, a kind of like every position. There's no such thing as a privileged position. Kind of like the post-structuralists and deconstructive philosophers in France were like, there's no author, there's no privileged position, there's no truth.
So this is like what one of the things that Jordan Peterson rails against.
Let me just finish my comment. I'm sorry. Yeah, because
Go.
Because the point is that what that led to was a kind of relativism, which allowed the opening for Trump and Breitbart and fake news and so on to kind of break through the kind of gaps in that structure, which had kind of reached its limit. So then the question is, how do we form like a new type of coherence? How do we develop a sense making that corresponds to these new circumstances, which are also changing and evolving so quickly?
So yeah, this is one of the gifts of Trump and Trump-ism and what have you, is that it has forced a sped up breaking down. The veil has been fucking torn away. Folks are paying attention more than ever before, and I think that there's a lot of opportunity in that. And I have a lot of concerns about the upcoming election. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that as well.
There's also a lot of disinfo, a lot of psyops. Like I look at something like QAnon or Pizzagate as very, very skillfully oriented psyops, psychological operations, which are really designed to kind of get into the fissures of people's psychologies and belief systems and exploit divisions.
Great, this is what I want to talk about. Keep going.
Yeah. So we need to figure out if we're going to create some type of unified resistance that spans across different class and ethnic divides. We're going to need to figure out how we find our way back to unifying ideas and understandings.
Do you think that there is a way for folks across the political spectrum to come together? Like we do have massive division occurring. It's always been there, but it's there more than ever. And it's heightening, so much so that some people fear that we're driving towards some form of civil war, on the extreme side of things. But you also have folks on the left and the right who have both, again, veil lifted and see that there are powers that be that do not have our best interests in heart, are running the show behind the scenes, and something must be done about it. That's the commonality. The stories around it seem very different. The solutions around it seem very different. Who's to blame seems very different. But that commonality seems very important to me.
I agree. It's important to do a little, work on understanding the historical reasons we're in this mess. One of the best books that I found that explained that or helped explain that to me was a book called Dark Money by Jane Mayer, who's a New Yorker staff writer. So she looked at the Koch brothers, David and Charles Koch. In the 60s, they were right-wing billionaires, and they did not like the direction that America was going in, which was towards more civil liberties, more socialized healthcare, better education for everybody, better public education. And they decided they wanted to change the direction of American society. And basically, they took the same mentality you would as like a corporate takeover artist, and they applied it to how do you move society in your direction. So first, they had a number of small summits where they brought together other very wealthy people until they created a coherence in their group about what needed to be done and what needed to be funded. And then they executed on a 30-year strategy. And then it involved funding think tanks, intellectuals like Charles Murray, who wrote The Bell Curve, which argues that racial minorities, some of them have less IQ innately than, other racial minorities, which then can be used as a reason to withdraw, social services from them. Heritage Foundation, Tea Party. They realized they needed social movements that looked like the progressive movements, just so there would be like in the newspapers and the media, there'd always be, the progressives did this, but then the Tea Party came, so they built, and it was trial and error. They built a whole infrastructure to swing U.S. society deeply towards the libertarian right. And essentially Trump is the victory of this strategy because he's basically appointing the Heritage Foundation's choices to lead his cabinet. The progressive community has never been as well organized as this. That's part of the problem. We know that many, many more people in the US share a progressive vision and would like to see, at this point, universal health care, potentially even UBI, potentially even a Green New Deal, but we need to figure out how we work together as a movement in a way we've never done before.
Why do you think it's been so difficult for us to develop the level of organization that you speak of on the right?
The left naturally balkanizes. We tend to like our little in-group. We tend to come to our egos, identify with our little. It's kind of funny because theoretically the left is all about cooperation and collaboration, but actually the right seem to be much better at it because their goals are so simple. Reduce taxes on the rich. Cut social services for poor and minority people. Those are very straightforward goals. The goals of the progressive community are more intangible. And also, one problem is if you're a very wealthy person, you naturally are attracted to tax breaks and so on. The wealth kind of tends to move and support the sort of negative agenda of the right wing often.
So, I suppose, well, first of all, before I get off of it, because I do think that it has, do you think that there is any possibility, because you're talking about the Koch brothers, et cetera, those who are sitting at the very top of the right political spectrum, but you also have the millions of people who are just like, raised Republican. And that's, their worldview is rooted in this, in certain, at least traditional, quote unquote, conservative values, and or identify as Christian and hold those values, and see the Republicans as the only ones who are even giving them lip service at the very least, whereas the left has, for the most part, secularized to the point of dismissal at best of those who hold strong religious conviction, especially Christians. How do you see any way that these mass numbers of people on both sides of this political spectrum could somehow come together? Because I don't really see another way of creating the level of changes that you speak of needing.
Yeah, I do think so. I think it's possible, and I think, and actually, I'm working on a book that's gotten a little bit interrupted at the moment with a London-based author and thinker, Wei Sang, where we're looking at the convergence of esoteric mysticism and radical and revolutionary movements, and essentially arguing that you can't have a successful revolutionary movement unless there's a spiritual or mystical or esoteric component to it.
I'm with you on that. I mean,
yeah,
again, look at MLK, look at Gandhi. They
exactly.
both had strong
Or even the
spiritual.
Nazis, they had a whole esoteric worldview and a cult idea around the Thule and the master race and all this stuff. So yeah, so you need to, if you're gonna get people engaged in a revolution, you have to really engage them at a very deep level, almost like a messianic, apocalyptic level. And I mean, that's what Islam does all the time, you know. But then also now, you know, if we look at where science is at, you know, in a way, like, you know, physics and mysticism have converged. You know, we could look at a lot of ways to say that there actually is a unifying paradigm that, you know, allows us to be, you know, both rational and mystical in the same way. And that could get us past these divisions of the materialist left, which is kind of trapped in a secularized concept, and therefore kind of others people who have mystical or religious beliefs, you know.
So
There's
this is one of the
a
things that sets you apart. Yeah. Uh, Breaking Open the Head was a deep dive into certain what we'll call psychedelic influences. And I know that that's been ayahuasca and other traditional medicinal plants have been a part of your work as well. They've definitely been part of my life path. And I'd love to hear a little bit more as to what you believe the role of these different quote plant medicines or psychoactive substances of whatever sorts play in wherever we're going.
That's a great question. I mean, yeah, it's also an interesting moment with that, because obviously, you know, this whole interaction between the West and South American shamanism is also kind of temporarily interrupted because of the coronavirus. Like, I have friends who were working at retreat centers in Peru and had to like flee the country, and, you know, Brazil was a mess and so on. So yeah, so as I said, I think that if we're going to basically not go extinct as a species, it's going to require a unifying planetary movement of consciousness. And it's going to require a realization of the potential unification of science and mysticism in a new paradigm. And I think the psychedelics and plant medicines are crucial for many people to have that direct experience of you know, this ontological baseline of reality that is so different than, you know, the normal, you know, waking consciousness. You know, I mean, we could talk about it as kind of initiatory experiences. And, you know, we look at the ruling elite of the world right now, whether it's, you know, what's his name, Deng Xiaoping or whatever his name is in China, or Trump, or Bolsonaro, or Boris Johnson. I mean, these are all, you know, from an indigenous perspective, uninitiated males. You know, they never had to go through an ontological confrontation with reality on an ultimate level. So essentially, they're trapped in their egos, and they're trying to manipulate reality continuously through a very egoic-based conception.
So it seems like you hold this the belief that if you're going to be a world leader, a prerequisite should be some form of ayahuasca, psychedelic consciousness, rite of passage experience.
It's well, I can't actually say that, because those experiences don't, you know, fix everybody. I mean, some people have those experiences and are still, you know, sick. I mean, you know, and even myself, like, I had many medicine experiences, and there were aspects of my own shadow, particularly around sexuality, that I couldn't address just through those type of shamanic experiences. It required another whole process.
Yeah,
but
I'd actually love to have you on sometime to dive deep into that one.
I figured you would.
Separate conversation.
We'll get there. Yeah, at some point. Yeah, I mean, I've been waiting a long time to really talk about it, because it's so painful and has so many different you know, pieces of the puzzle.
Yeah, well,
you know,
I followed it closely, and I would love to be part of that conversation with you.
But I, you know, and I'm hoping also, having gone through such a process, that I have some valuable, you know, medicine, you know, for, you know, maybe men in particular, but even also women.
In short, that's why I didn't just you know, ostracize you like I've seen other people do, because I watched how you responded, and I have interacted with a lot of men through particularly the Me Too few years, and there was so much deflection, diminishment, and I wasn't seeing that with you.
Yeah.
So anyway, I'm gonna
anyway,
bookmark that another time.
Anyway, yeah. So I do think that we may move into a period where those people who've gone through those ontological and phenomenological confrontations with these other dimensions of reality are going to naturally move into leadership positions. And I do think that if there is going to be a continuation of humanity, past the next 20 or 30 years, the counsel, the vision that one receives through the plant medicines is going to be very, very important for moving forward. And also, I mean, another whole layer of it is psychic experience. Like, and this is something I've written about a lot. Like Dean Radin, who's a scientist who studies psychic phenomena, talks about how, like, we could be in our kind of evolution with psychic phenomena the same way we were at with electricity in the 18th century. Like Benjamin Franklin had flown a kite and he'd gotten struck by lightning, but we couldn't do anything with it. We couldn't, use it as a transformative force. But, when you've had psychic experience, you recognize that this is something, really, really powerful and untapped. And if society's focus was to move in this direction, there might be transformative capacities there that are beyond what we now understand.
I gotta say, I've got friggin' chills from that, because, like, I'm sure there are those listening who'll be like, all right, we're going off the deep end now. Yeah. I've had direct experience with, I don't know, variety of different energetic, spiritual, psychic, etc. Forces and experiences for 15-ish years at this point. And I've actually a bit limited in how I've been communicating about them publicly, in part because they are so not, that historically they have not been widely accepted at all. I do believe that there are more and more and more people who are having some form of experiences that they're like, whoa, what was that? And are increasingly open to it, but it still in many ways still feels long off, far away for us as a culture to be like, yes, of course, this is a thing, just like drinking water is a thing. What do you think it would take for us as a society, as a culture, to kind of recognize and embrace that there are experiences like this available to us as human beings?
I don't know. I mean, from 2002, when I published my first book, Breaking Open the Head, the idea that there was going to be this massive psychedelic renaissance and there'd be research all over the world and mass acceptance and, movement towards legalization, that was going to happen in my lifetime seemed totally unlikely.
Here it is.
Yeah. And, so, I hope, I think that book contributed a little bit towards, the reframing. So, we might be closer than we think. You never know. I mean, it does sort of feel, and this is also, I wrote another book called 2012, The Return of Quetzalcoatl, that was looking at the prophecies of traditional cultures and ancient cultures from around the world about the time that we're in now. And many people then laughed when 2012 came and went and nothing big happened. They were like, that was the fraud. But to me, it actually does feel that we've been stepping deeper and deeper into kind of a new, somewhat murkier reality, very, very ambiguous, and in some ways a more psychic kind of reality. And I think that Trump's victory is one expression of that. I mean, Trump was going to resoundingly was going to lose according to all of the polls. Suddenly he won, and then we have to look at his name, Trump, which is like the trump card in the deck that trumps all the other cards. And then there's a lot of weird esoteric shit about Trump's victory. If you get into how, like, on 4chan and so on,
I thought you were going to go there.
they were performing this whole chaos magic experiment.
I went down that rabbit hole.
God, Kek. What's that?
I went down that rabbit hole. There was a couple month period where I'm like, what the hell is going on here? And I read and I researched and with Pepe the Frog and the Chaos Magic and Kek, it's fascinating, fascinating.
Yeah.
Things that I always, these occult magic and things I'd always kind of relegated to leftist circles, progressive-oriented people, etc.
Yeah,
being utilized by what we'll call, like, alt-right, right-wing type of ideologies and forces.
Yeah,
and quite possibly with a very real, incredible, tangible effect.
A useful book on the subject, which we actually excerpt on Liminal, is called Dark Star by Gary Lachman, looking at the occult roots of Trump's victory. And Trump himself actually could be seen as a practicing occultist. He grew up in the church of Norman Vincent Peale. And Trump has a notoriously tiny attention span, but apparently he could listen to Norman Vincent Peale speak for hours. And Peale was the author of The Power of Positive Thinking. So essentially, the idea was that if you want to accomplish something, you only say positive things. You don't let any negativity come in. You just hone in on what you want and you make it happen. Mm-hmm. So if you look back at Trump's statements about running for president, he was like, "Look, if I win for president, I'm going to win. There's no question, no doubt about it. I will win. Not even a question. So in a way, we could look at Trump as a very powerful sorcerer who used the power of positive thinking to create this reality for himself."
Fascinating concept, really fascinating concept. Two thoughts on that. One is, and I'm going to just list them twice and do what you want with them. That famous picture of him with, like, I don't know if they were Arab sheiks or what, with the, like, holding the orb. It's insane. And second is, how does that just tie into narcissistic personality disorder?
Yeah, it does. I mean, we're living in his narcissistic mirror reflection right now.
So, I mean, what you described as a cult magic use on his part, I mean, is that why he's so successful with it? Because it does blend so easily with a narcissistic outlook?
I mean, I'm opening it as a possibility, and I think it's worth considering, I mean, it's like, Neil Strauss, who wrote The Game, he was a nebbish who couldn't get laid very often, who decided to turn himself into a, super player. Mm-hmm. And when you read that book, I think the main technique that he used to do it was hypnosis. Mm-hmm. He spent a lot of time getting hypnotized and reprogrammed his, kind of egoic structure.
I feel like I did a very similar process in my own journey and work with a similar process with my clients. It is like a complete reorientation of self-identity. Yeah. And I while I wouldn't generally term it this way, I think I understand why you refer to it as a form of hypnosis.
Well, in his case, it was literally hypnosis. He was going to the top hypnotists he could find and getting hypnotized again and again to retrain his psychology.
So how fascinating. How does that connect to Trump and the narcissism?
It's like self-hypnosis. I mean, Trump just basically willed himself into this power of positive thinking mentality, where if you have a goal, you're just like, I'm accomplishing this goal, and that's it. I'm going to be president. I'm going to win, definitely. Somehow or other, he made it happen.
And what about the orb in the Middle East?
I mean, that was a mind-boggling image, and I don't even know what to say about that.
I did.
I mean,
there's got to be something to it. That's all I'm saying. I don't know what it is.
But basically, I mean, what I was, I was pointing out that after 2012, it seems like we've slowly been moving into something that's like a collective psychedelic journey, which at this point we would have to say is increasingly like a bad trip, but bad trips are also very powerful trips.
Very true.
One way, there's a Nahuatl shaman, Sergio Magana, who wrote a book called The Age of the Sixth Sun. And in that book, he talks about from his Aztec lineage that they saw 2012 to 2021 as a transition time between the past period, which was the age of the fifth sun, to the next period, which is the age of the sixth sun. The age of the fifth sun, they called the sun of light. And during a time when the sun of light is happening, which is like a 6,000-year cycle or whatever, it's like rationality, waking consciousness, materiality. Those are the predominant characteristics. As we swing back into a sun of darkness, there's a transition to the psychic realm. So reality in itself becomes more dreamlike, more like a waking dream. It becomes more psychically malleable. It's more psychically permeable. And I think when we look at things like, even that Trump orb image, it suggests that it's like a cartoon reality that's beginning to appear around us, and now with everybody in hazmat suits and masks, and the sense of our fear of contact with another person. I mean, it's like some massive projection of the interiority of the psyche.
I definitely noticed that in myself. I watched my own journey with all of this. I watched my own paranoia that arose in the first couple of weeks of basically just like apocalyptic fears that took hold, really. And then also I sense that there is an underlying fear of connection with other people physically within me right now, that I'm like, I don't want to hold on to this.
Yeah. And I guess what I wanted to say in the beginning was that I feel that a lot of people are, they're sensing there's more to the story, and they're grabbing on to fragments of things that they can hold on to, whether it's Plandemic or Bill Gates is a monster who wants to, create eugenics on the global population through an evil vaccine.
5G.
5G is another one. I guess from an occult or shamanic or esoteric perspective, maybe the problem is that we're looking for agency in these kind of humans, but actually the agency is on another level altogether. I mean, like the Gnostics would talk about like the archons, or other levels of spiritual, occult, demonic entities who have different types of agenda. And this is something that I explored.
Hold on. I want to make sure I'm following. Are you saying that you believe that it's not about Trump, it's not about the Rothschilds, it's not about whatever that there are demonic spiritual forces in the spiritual plane that are really at the root cause of all of this? Is that what you're saying?
I mean, I don't like to use the word believe, but that's my strongly held hypothesis.
Okay, so I don't know that I'm following you here, meaning I'm like on the same page with you ultimately up to this point, and I don't know. So I'm not just saying, fuck that. I really want you to be able to convince me. Help me understand.
Yeah.
Really.
I mean, I had to go through, I had, 100 ayahuasca ceremonies and got introduced to all these different levels, other levels of, dimensional reality and so on. Some very incredibly beautiful experiences, like higher, it seemed like higher spiritual beings, some, lower, entities. I got very involved in the esoteric philosophy of Rudolf Steiner, who was founder of an esoteric school called Anthroposophy, and a visionary from the late 19th and early 20th century, who started biodynamic agriculture and Waldorf schools. And he talked about these different spiritual forces that work on humanity, all the time, and he gave them particular names. I mean, it's a lot to go into. I don't know how far down this.
We can't go. We have to be limited because we got
yeah.
5 to 10 minutes left. But you know, again, we're definitely starting to open up something that is bound to have pushback. And one person already basically left. And
sure. I didn't, you know, and as I said, I mean, it's a hypothesis that I'm just putting out there.
So how is that different or similar to?
By the way, I did write a recent book, a short book called The Occult Control System, which was particularly looking at UFOs and alien abduction accounts through this esoteric prism, where I talk a lot about Rudolf Steiner's philosophies. It's a 50-page book.
What is it called
on Amazon? The Occult Control System.
There you go, folks. You can find out more about this aspect of the belief system there. But I guess like a question around
theory, not a belief system.
I'm sorry. A perspective? Lens?
Yeah, a lens.
Set of ideas?
I think that we need to be able to entertain all range of ideas, but if we get locked into belief systems, then we've made the same errors that people make over and over again.
I'm with you. I believe that as well. How is that similar or different from the folks who are just like, this is the work of Satan, these are the end times, and this is why we have these people who are feasting on babies' blood?
Yeah, I mean, there's some similarities. I mean, so for instance, like they could track back to something like the Illuminati. I mean, there was a Bavarian Illuminati. There was a guy, Adam Weishaupt, who started this, organization. The organization came to the U.S. Yale has a Skull and Bones club where both I think George Bush was a member. Like a lot of the power elite went there, where they had to get drunk and swear oaths of allegiance on Geronimo's skull and so on. And for them it was probably a drunken frat boy prank. But then if you have this sense that there actually are these occult realities, what they're doing in a sort of subconscious or dim level of consciousness may actually have validity, or it may actually have consequences in terms of the types of allegiances they're making with certain forces that are beyond the human realm.
So it's harder for me to go here. I like you, I entertain possibilities. And again, I definitely have experiences in my own life that are otherworldly, might we say. And even the notion of like entities, for example, like I was really an eye roller around, like, yeah, sure. And then, for lack of a better way of putting it, I had an entity removed from me.
Yeah.
And it was kind of hard to hold on to my skepticism after that. And I still feel a little bit of the skepticism, but it was a pretty friggin' tangible experience.
Yeah.
So one thing that I've learned by this point is, no matter how, like you, I am on a constant quest for deeper understanding and truth. We go about it in different ways, find different things. And still devoting my life in this way, I'm still aware that there's so much more going on in this world, in this universe, than what I understand. So the number of times my frame for reality and how it works has been utterly blown apart and needed to be put back together again, has left me in a place where I know that there is more that I don't know than what I do. So when I hear these things that can sound very out there or not fitting into my current frame, I know well enough to be like, that doesn't mean there isn't truth in it. And even if it's not the capital T fundamental overall complete truth, doesn't mean that there isn't truth in it. Yeah. Doesn't mean that doesn't hold part of the answer.
It's a vector. I mean, and just like, whether the virus was engineered and reduced accidentally, whether it happened, naturally through a species transmission, whether it was engineered and released intentionally, which is also possible. What we're basically being shown by that is, how our science and technology has, well, I guess we could say, how we have, kind of overloaded our connection to nature. How we've like broken our connection to nature, so we're getting these like negative feedbacks, that are causing massive consequences. And so we know that if we're going to, get beyond this impasse, we somehow have to come back into some type of, connection with nature, some type of regenerative balance with our ecosystems. And
so that's a great crossover point into kind of the realms that I usually dive into, which have to do with like, sorry, my dog's going crazy,
cool.
which have to do with the like balance of masculine and feminine in our societies and on this planet. I know this is an area that you've given some attention to as well. Can you speak to that and how it connects with what you're talking about?
Let's see. Well, yeah, it's complicated. On the one hand, we've had a patriarchal, hierarchical system that has, put elevated men to these kind of positions of power where they don't have any tribal societies. Like if you read like this anthropologist Pierre Klaus wrote a book called what was it called again? Society Against the State. And he argued that a lot of these indigenous cultures worked because the chief might be a man, but even the chief was answerable to like the council of grandmothers. So there were women who held the power of the chief in check. So we've developed a patriarchal civilization where uninitiated men who are often sociopaths have been given the ultimate power. And that's clearly a completely unsustainable scenario, even in the next short period. However, I think on another level, there's complexity around even this idea of materialism roots back to the word mater, which is mother. And you could see that something about our materialist civilization is actually connected to kind of the dark mother, because the men who are ruling are uninitiated and they're not in their Shiva capacity. They kind of allow the dark feminine energy to also go berserk and get totally out of balance. So it's I don't know if that helps, but it's a little more complicated than just saying that men are bad and women are good.
I've definitely learned that one.
Yeah.
Well, honestly, I could do this for another hour with you, and I can't. Is there any last message that you'd like to leave our listeners and watchers with?
Well, I'm working with my friend Rory Spowers. I really recommend his essay, which is on Eco Hustler, Is the Virus Our Vaccine? And we're developing a webinar that we're going to probably run for a month starting in mid-June on building a regenerative future. And the idea will be to present both like a sort of systemic analysis on like the issues like food, health, community, economy, but then also to give people practical ideas and tools for how they can begin transitioning into this kind of next system, new paradigm.
We're begging for that. Folks want to know, like, what can I do?
Exactly.
It's the powerlessness that I think has people dive so deep into these various
dark rabbit holes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And how can folks find you and find out more about you?
I post a lot on my private Facebook page. I have a web magazine called Liminal.news. Those are probably the most, the ways that I'm manifesting right now.
Yeah, fantastic. And we'll put those links in the show notes for the podcast as well. I want to thank you for being part of this conversation with me, Daniel. Again, I've got lots of respect for you and what you've just your commitment to your work. And you're a man on purpose. I watched how you responded to Mickey, the filmmaker of Plandemic's strong lashback to your critique and the way in which you held strong in the face of what I honestly saw as bullying and intimidation tactics. That only increased my respect for you, to be honest. A lesser individual would have, backtracked in one form or another, and you just held steady. You're very clearly committed to finding a deeper truth and doing your part to help steward humanity through this intense transition that we're in, whatever that may be. Please, folks, check out his books. Check out his writing, the new Liminal.news online magazine, and more. Thank you again, and please.
Great to finally do this with you, Destin, and look forward to more.
Yeah, there's going to be at least one more. Folks, please check out the Evolved Masculine podcast on your favorite podcast platform. Rate, review, subscribe, share. It really helps. Please do that. Helps us helps me be motivated to do more of these, and helps them spread and build our audience. Thank you, everyone. See you soon. Thank you for listening to the Evolved Masculine podcast. If you liked what you heard, please be sure to subscribe, give us a 5-star rating, and leave a comment to help other men discover this show and help the Evolved Masculine movement spread. It really does help. I want you to do more than simply consume content, but rather to embody a new way of being and radically transform your life for the better. Join us in the Evolved Masculine membership community, a brotherhood of men who are committed to being the best men that we can be. Crystallize a vision of your most evolved masculine self and implement the tools to take him out of the idea realm and begin embodying him now. Reprogram your sexuality and deepen your understanding of women and the feminine. Learn more and join us at evolvedmasculine.com/membership. I believe in you.
Thank you.